Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Welcome to the 50th episode. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, Chief Story Maker of Elkins Consulting. Over the past 49 episodes, I've shared quite a few of my own stories about how I became who I am today. And I've had the great honor to interview so many incredible people about their stories and how they shaped them. It's fascinating to me that people don't realize that the stories they share and how they share them change the way people perceive them. We can tell people we're a good cook, or we're smart, or we're generous. But until we can demonstrate those values, no one cares. And there's no way people will just simply believe us. The trick to demonstrating those values when you can't actually cook for the person that is 1,000 miles away is to share a story about how well you cook, about the ingredients you use, about the people that you've hosted at your dining room table. We demonstrate our values and our character in the stories that we share and how we share them, in the role we take in those stories, and in the characters that we describe, that we interact with in our stories. I love being intentional about the stories I share, because I know that when I share a story that's going to make an impact on somebody, it will trigger a memory of their own and bring up a story in their heads that maybe they never thought about in terms of the impact it had on who they are and their current internal messages that are still playing out in their lives today. I hope you enjoy this 50th episode. I love to talk about how we learn from our struggles, but sometimes we forget that we also learn from our joy and happy experiences. I think about who we are and how we grow as people and how we become who we are throughout our lives a lot. I think about it in terms of the different stories that we've experienced and the way that we tell them to ourselves. And I've heard so many times that people talk about how your struggles are what define you and those are your best learning opportunities. And while I agree that struggle is a great time to learn about yourself and your relationships with others, I also think that times of fun, times of good, times of joy also help you grow. And I'm not so sure that people truly understand and appreciate that. I'm thinking specifically of a road trip I took with my sister many years ago. I had just graduated from college, and she was a freshman in college. We were in Colorado, and she had a cute little Honda Civic that leaked oil like crazy. And we decided we were going to go on a road trip just for a couple of days before she had to go back for second semester of freshman year, and I was moving to Washington, D.C. for a paid internship. We got in her little car, and we drove over to the AAA office. Our family had been members for years. And we walked up to one of the desks and asked a woman for a map to Las Vegas. She took one look at us and just assumed that we were much younger than we were. She said, "Las Vegas? That's a really long drive." And this is in Colorado Springs, by the way, so it is a very long drive. And she was very concerned that we were considering doing this just in a couple of days and coming back. So she said, "That's a long drive, ladies. Maybe you should reconsider." And I said, "Well, it's not really about the destination, right? It's about the adventure." She looked at us like we were crazy. But we took that map that she had highlighted from Colorado Springs to Las Vegas, Nevada, and we got in the car and drove over to the nearest Kmart so we could get a case of oil that we knew we would need for that little car. And we started to drive. A lot of little silly things happened. Like, for instance, there's a place at on a pass where there's always been a sign that says Buffalo Overlook. And we had lived in Colorado for a very long time. So when we saw that sign, we didn't assume that we would actually see any buffalo, because in all of the time I had lived in Colorado, I had never actually seen buffalo at the Buffalo Overlook. And as we drove by it, my sister was driving, I looked out the window, and there was a herd of buffalo below the highway. I could not stop laughing. My sister couldn't figure out what I was laughing about. I said, "Look, Karen, there are buffalo at the Buffalo Overlook." She hesitated for a second. I said, "I've never seen buffalo at the Buffalo Overlook," and we giggled ridiculously. It wasn't that funny, but for some reason it just took us. So we're driving through Colorado, and we got all the way to Glenwood Springs, which is kind of on the western side of the mountains in Colorado, almost to Utah. And I said, hey, we could stop in Glenwood Springs. We could go to the hot springs. We could find a place to spend the night. What do you think? And she said, Sarah, I'd just like to get out of Colorado for a couple days. And I said, okay, I'm fine with that. So we kept on driving. We made it to a little town in Utah when the car going up a hill started sputtering and it just wouldn't go fast enough. We weren't sure exactly what was going on, but we kind of had an idea because both of us had cars that we had to work on ourselves. Neither of us had money to have people work on our cars. So when we finally got to the other side of this hill and we pulled off in a little tiny town with one gas station and a little diner, and we pulled up to the gas station and filled up the tank. I walked in and I got some of that dry gas stuff that you can put in a gas tank in case there's any kind of moisture in the gas tank. And I went back out to the car. We pulled it around to in front of the diner because I had to go to the bathroom. And I walked into the bathroom as my sister opened the hood. Let me tell you, when I walked out of that little diner, I told my sister that she was not to go inside to go to the bathroom. It was filthy. It was exactly the kind of bathroom where you would think that somebody was watching you. Creepy. So I got out to the car and I told my sister not to go in there and she laughed. And meanwhile, she had pulled out one of her spark plugs and she was holding it with a paper towel in front of her face. She said, our spark plugs are carbonized. Do you have any sandpaper with you? And I hesitated. Of course I didn't have sandpaper with me. But then suddenly the light bulb went on in my head and I said, no, but I have a nail file. So I grabbed my nail file out of the car and I went to try to use the nail file on the carbon of the tip. And it wouldn't fit. And we were concerned that it would mess up the gap in the spark plug, which then would make it misfire. So I peeled the end off of the nail file and very carefully pushed that little sandpaper back and forth between my sister's hands on that spark plug and took some of the carbon off of the spark plug. And as I finished that first spark plug and we both shined, knowing that we were solving our own problem and felt like a Maverick TV show, I looked over toward the diner and the blinds were popped open and at least 4 men with varying degrees of mouths full of teeth were looking out at us, very puzzled at our behavior. One of them walked out when he saw me and said, do you ladies need some help? My sister and I looked at each other, smiled, and looked at him and said, no thanks, I think we've got this. He said, well, that's fine, good luck, and he turned around and walked back into the diner. And in those seconds as he walked in, I could see those blinds pop open again so everyone could watch what we were doing. Well, one at a time, my sister pulled out those spark plugs, and I used my little sandpaper from the nail file and took off some of the carbon off of those spark plugs, put them back in the car, and drove away. And everything worked. We didn't have another problem with it. It was kind of crazy, but it was awesome. There were a lot of stories like that on that trip. We ended up in Mesquite, Nevada, spent the night there. I did some gambling because I was 21, and Karen stood behind me to watch. We actually won $300, and we got carded at least 5 times while we were there. We had a lovely breakfast the next day, and then started to drive back. It was a road trip that was so memorable, and I have so many fond, ridiculous stories from that experience. And I know that we learned about things from each other on that trip. We got really tired and punchy. We got very silly and told really stupid jokes. And I learned how resilient we could be and how good we could be at doing things that people would expect us not to be able to do. I was proud of us. And when we got back to Colorado Springs and she had to go back to college, and I filled my little Chevette full of all of my things to move all the way to Washington, D.C., we hugged and we cried. We had had these magical days together, and we learned about ourselves, we learned about each other, and we made our relationship even stronger. I don't think it's that hard to learn from these experiences. I think it's just a matter of choosing to relive them through your stories, find the humor in them, and find the lessons. I could talk about my struggles all day long, but where's the fun in that? Find your opportunities to learn in your joy as well. Thank you so much for listening to the 50th episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. To learn more about Elkins Consulting and how we can help you learn which stories to tell and how to tell them, visit our website at elkinsconsulting.com or email me at sarahelkins@elkinsconsulting.com. I look forward to hearing from you.